Just want a little. I smoke, yeah. Nigga, I burn the marijuana and they won't book me for that. See me on the streets, here they come, here they at. Stroll around the corner, hands in the hood with a gat. They won't book me for that. Won't bag me for that, huh? Undercovers come up to me, ask me for crack. Not protect and to serve, that's provoking the act. They won't book me for that, they won't bag me for that. But the man in ties, they just look at me back. I burn the marijuana and they won't book me for that. Is it the rich that is mean, or the ways that you stack? Or the pigmentation of his skin, he's black, like they won't book me for that. Won't bag me for that. Ain't even speeding, I'm doing my limit. Can't be taxed, it's illegal. System structured, so you can't be rich. Got us breathing mustard. My brain's blue from the smoke. Ponics, human product. Illumines false light, they call simulate. The devil used man to try to make life, cause God wouldn't tell him, condemn him, fell him. God gave us the seed to reproduce till Mother Earth is full. So in the mean, I burn the marijuana and they won't book me for that. See me on the street, say they come, here they at. Stroll around the corner, hands in the hood with the gats. They won't book me for that. Where the good people at? Motherfuckers come up to me, ask me for crack. Protect them to serve, that's provoking the act. They won't book me for that, they won't back me for that. But a man in ties, they just look at me back, cause they think I'm black. Nah, man, bruh, something like that.
Marijuana, yo, it calm me. I don't know why they always on me. Only thing a king for me. If you stop us, we put it out calmly. Officer, where's your authority to impede a national on her land or his seas? How I love the sense of me. Bonnet I tell, no grabber in my weed. We check out the stems and seeds. Rolling while I'm rolling, that's a regular tendency. Enough man beat the NC, but me some bubba roots or some ganja tea. I take 2 draws for my enemies. Envious bad mind with the jealousy. But on the nothing we are the remedy. Chef in Zanga bits, we mastered the recipe. Watch this roll, yeah, it's a masterpiece. I don't care who sees, I burn my herb in the streets. The cushion bang is always on me. Few times the pussy them try swami. Intelligent tone, I tell them calmly, I'm MIA, Moorish Imperial Army. Mind what you say, you might rub me wrongly. Matter in me eye, I bury and beep. Me no even brush me teeth. Me want me tampy, me no get a spliffy bun, me get cranky.
Marijuana and they won't book me for that. See me on the streets, here they come, here they at. Stroll around the corner, hands in the hood with a gat. They won't book me for that, won't bag me for that, huh? Undercovers come up to me, ask me for cracks. Not protect and to serve, that's provoking the act. They won't book me for that, they won't back me for that. But the man in ties, they just look at me back. I burn the marijuana and they won't book me for that. Is it the rich that is mean, or the ways that you stack? Or the pigmentation of his skin, he's black, like they won't book me for that. Won't bag me for that. Yeah.
Whew. Fuck me, that was intense.
Sounds like it's having a hallucinogenic effect. Not like a drug, which is harmful and wrong, and just say no, kids. But spacey nonetheless.
Have you ever heard or thought that you saw or felt the pain from third eye to your jaw? Felt schizo, brain circuits trip so. Got me seeing strobe lights like a disco. Under skin crawls, seeing one steak shapes out of the norm, demonic forms takes. Forces external, stress is extreme. Eyes wide open, though it's a dream. It seems sort of like alienation, surrounded by aliens at a PlayStation. Nerd impulses, feeling pulses on noses, suffering from tripped out psychosis. Doses, seeing clouds drip like ET sun rays, touch fingertips, reflect kiss off your cheek like lips, repeating like skips, peeling the air in strips, pattern swirl, walls seem to breathe, mixed up senses that I can't perceive. All I see is sounds, I'm hearing what smells, I'm craving hallucinations like hell. Enter the realm where there's talking gazelles, speaking metaphysic, I'm feeling depressed. Fez wearing hornell puts his hand on my chest and says, breathe out. Breathe out. Breathe in. The drip of the tree. Breathe in. Breathe out. Breathe out. Breathe in. The drip of the tree. Breathe in. Breathe out. Breathe out. Breathe in. The drip of the tree. Breathe in. Breathe out. Breathe out. All I did was have a piece of a shroom. My mind going zoom as I spin with this room. Forks run with spoons, knives guilty for murders they committed. Should I be committed to a mental ward? Straight jacket fitted. Frog walks out the wall talking ribbit. I'm overstanding every word said in my head. Then here comes death, smelling like dead, telling me to follow him flying on fog. On his death log he checks off guard. Looking into his hood, darkness all I see, and darkness is all around me. Light asks me to take a west sound beat, then introduced me to speed of thought, and she told me by being told man knows not. Carrying on, swinging like Barry Bonds. The flower bouquet from whence he married yawns. Rapper's frost was a corpse. Power and force, divorced of course. Power is an illusion, took the bigger loss. My last 4 blinks felt like ice rinks. Came to my senses looking down sinks. After that I didn't know what to think, so I just put the rest of shrooms into my drink. Breathe in, the drip of the tree. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe out. Breathe in, the drip of the tree. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe out. Breathe in, the drip of the tree. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe out. Breathe in, the drip of the tree. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe out. The trip is a trip.
Islam. Peace to all the Moors.
Islam.
All the Moors in their realm. Hope you had your little peace. Hope you had your little peace before the session.
But it's like, I hope not, you know?
Brother Heru, floor is yours for Islam.
Islam. Get this camera working again. All right. Thanks everyone for tuning in to this week's lesson. Sorry for my tardiness today, but let's hop into it because we do, as usual, have a lot of things to get through. There's always more that I end up wanting to get through than I planned to do the week before, but sometimes it's because I receive things from random people in response to the classes, and sometimes it's just because I come across more stuff, because like I said, there's always so much more information coming out about the mysteries of dimethyltryptamine and the secrets of it that are sort of just almost like another Moorish Renaissance, you know, basically. So yeah, let's hop into the work today and get on it. So our lesson plan, and this will be our last class today before we actually go into the workshop.
physical workshop of how you would go about creating your own, we'll call it spiritual or ethereal spaceships, as you will, as a code word, I guess. But yeah, basically, this is going to be the class workshop will be about how to make your own spaceships. You go on your own trips through the underworld, and we're going to get into the actual protocol. It's called the PF Tech. You actually look it up yourselves. It's called the PF Tech method, and it came together out of the 1970s, 76, I think it was. I forget the name of the gentleman who came up with the method for it. Probably Terrence McKenna, or someone related to Terrence McKenna, who came up with the PF Tech method to produce psilocybin mushrooms, basically. So we'll be going over how one would go about that in theory if one wanted to make their own. That'll be next week. This will be our last week diving into the science of it. And we took our time going through symbols first and then science second, basically to culminate in this class. We're going to try to tie it all together, at least in theory, because like I said, this curriculum is about all of us working together to solve this mystery, this continued mystery that goes beyond our political problems today. It went beyond our problems in the grasslands 20,000 years ago. It's going to go beyond whatever we come through in the future. We're always going to be sort of in the business, in the Moorish business of studying ourselves and uncovering this unlimited, limitless mystery that is life, is the physical realm. What is it? Where did it come from? Who are we really? All right. We're always going to be, just like we're always worshiping, we're always having religion, we're always going to have this course that we're on, trying to find ourselves out. So in honor of that, let's go to lesson plan. Today we're going to start looking at the DMT worlds that we looked at last time, and not just the worlds that I myself or the people who would be tuning into this discussion would talk about, but also the DMT worlds that have been confirmed through various, research papers and scientific studies that we looked at by the PhDs in the field that we looked at last day. They're all encountering the same things when they're doing their clinical trials and whatnot, and looking at people's responses physiologically and spiritually and psychologically to the DMT trips that they're experimenting with in these studies. So it's not just us, it's happening all over the world. And we just happen to be here in our place dealing with this as regards Noble Drew Ali and Islamism. So we're going to basically be looking at the DMT worlds that are in the research and in the reports and in our own experiences, and what that might have to do with the link between physics and astronomy that we talked about a couple classes ago when we looked at Blackroot science. And I sent that book out to some of those who were there at the lecture, talking about how subjective reality manifests physical reality, or how things come out of nothingness, right? What is the relationship between the DMT worlds and the special link between physics and astronomy? The fact that an atom is actually a solar system and vice versa. So that's what we're going to be looking at mostly today, or for the first little bit. And then we're going to get into, yes, I put in quotes this Moorish Israelite connection because it's the same thing. But Noble Drew Ali knows about that with, the Moorish Hebrews and all that. But of course, there's always camps that we're dealing with, and we want to present as much of a unified front because we understand the importance of nationality, that we can talk about nationality in the context of Islamism, in that we all know in what ways we are united. We don't need to have camps because the nationality is global, and it's the same thing. So we'll look at that research paper, right? Getting High with the Most High. Let me come back to this camera. I can turn the camera back on. It should be back on, right? This one right here. Getting High with the Most High. So eloquently titled by these professors who put this paper together. in the Journal of Psychedelic Studies, published 2019. We're going to look at the scriptural proof for Islamism as regards to the esoteric side of Islamism, which is entheogens. We're going to look at the proof in the scriptures, starting with the Israelite paradigm and Moses. We'll talk about why we'll be looking at Moses during the class. So recap of last day, we figured out the chemistry, the brain relationship, what is DMT as a molecule, that it should have such a powerful, profound effect on our physiology as human beings. We talked about tryptamine, the tryptophan cascade, and how tryptophan, polymerizes towards and into DMT over time and in the right environment, where the pineal gland is not producing the DMT per se, but the pineal gland is producing the stuff that allows tryptamine molecule to eventually become DMT by not destroying the tryptamine molecule and its integrity, right? Because remember the monoamine oxidase right here, MAO, it's crossed out here, right? That is a you can say an enzyme or a compound or whatever that inhibits the tryptamine's continued buildup and cascade into DMT. This destroys tryptamine. It dismantles the tryptamine. The pineal gland produces the stuff that stops the MAO from dismantling the tryptamine. So the tryptamine continues to live on and endures and becomes the DMT. And we looked at the reason that the pineal gland doesn't tend to produce much DMT, and that's because the pathway that tryptophan prefers to take is usually towards serotonin production and not towards being integrated into DMT off the bat by these two enzymes here, AADC and INMT. It doesn't take this pathway. It takes this pathway the vast majority of the time. And so we don't really, that's the reason why we don't produce DMT in the types of ways that we get from ingesting the compound known as psilocybin or psilocin. And that is why psilocybin or psilocin is so sacred, the most sacred of all sacred things that we have, a direct tie to our melanin. And we'll get more into that in the next cycle of the curriculum, of the relationship between DMT and melanin, because of what DMT allows us to tap into, and because of the effect that melanin has with light and what it does with light. And this is all about light, as we're going to come to see when we talk today about physics and astronomy. It's all about light. And since melanin is responsible for basically taking that light and doing things with it, DMT and melanin are very intimately related, at least in my opinion, and seem to be in the words of our ancestors based on the symbols that they left. And we're going to get into that stuff in our next segment. Today we're going to look at the research paper. But just a reminder of the original 360-degree concept, the original Eye of Ra concept, or the sun disk concept of the closed loop concept, which is that DMT is easily destroyed by MAO. And psilocybin, which becomes psilocin in the body, is look at it. It's the exact same chemical structure, compound, same chemistry. However, psilocybin takes its original DMT form and changes the structure. It doesn't change the actual molecule itself. It doesn't change the substance of the molecule itself. Psilocybin is a change in the structure. Psilocybin is DMT activated. It's DMT that realizes, okay, in order to help or to have my information decoded, I have to change my structure and form a closed loop between the hydroxyl group that hangs on from psilocybin with the nitrogen group of DMT and form a hydrogen bond which seals the molecule. And now MAO is barred from accessing the tryptamine and dismantling it. So psilocybin is basically DMT that's been doing a lot of studying. DMT that's been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of preparing itself to get itself in a position where it can be accessed. It's an organic technology. It's a sentient organic technology is what psilocybin is, right? It's what DMT is, but psilocybin even more so because it's DMT in a form in nature that is totally unique, changing its structure so that it can be decoded. And we went over that stuff sort of last day. And I want to begin today's talk about DMT worlds with something very interesting I came across. And by the way, Cujo, if anybody has a question that I'm not seeing right now about the chemistry we went over last day, go ahead and interrupt me with the question because I want people to be able to make sense of that concept so they can keep it in their mind. So that way it feeds into their understanding of the scriptures later on. So feel free to interrupt me, bro, if you got to do that.
All right. No problem, Mark.
Yeah. All right. So I found something very interesting. And I thought it was so cool that I came across this right before our class today. And it has to do with the video we went over last week. Not the Neo video, but the video that basically was an AI generation of a psilocybin trip where the guy or whoever the person was is walking down the street or through the park, and the world changes around them, right? They look at the walls get portals in them and begin to change. The environment, it's got a big tree with grass and it changes shape and changes color. It looks like something foreign, like a tree with grass, but like an inverted tree with grass, like a totally foreign sort of exotic form, right? And it's changing as a person's walking. And I said on higher doses, those changes become more and more interactive. You begin to explore that new environment, right? It just where you were just changed. There's something else. You're still lying in bed, but it's just your environment that was in your mind at the time when you went into the trip, that it just changes. You can just go places. And so this has to do with that. And it's a little freaky because of how real it is. It's actually Neil deGrasse Tyson on stage talking about the algorithms that exist in string theory, looking at, this basically smallest particles, right? Studying particles and the codes that are discovered in string theory in those particles. Check this out for a minute before we vibe about it. Let's see if I can just get us into a reading view.
It's even more bizarre than that, because when you then try to understand these pictures, you find out that buried in them are computer codes, just like the type that you find in a browser when you go surf the web.
So I just want to say, they're going to go over this in a second about what specifically he's talking about, because deGrasse Tyson's a great speaker. He's very animated, and this is cool. But I'll just back it up because I know it's sort of kind of quickly, so we can all sort of just tune in there. Here we go.
And it's even more bizarre than that, because when you then try to understand these pictures, you find out that buried in them are computer codes, just like the type that you find in a browser when you go surf the web. And so I'm left with the puzzle of trying to figure out whether I live in the Matrix or not.
Okay, so he made a joke about the Matrix. But the thing is that this is basically a scientific convention going on. These guys are high level quantum physicists, that sort of stuff. Neil deGrasse Tyson's a very, everyone knows who he is. He's a pretty high in the realm of academia globally, and these guys are serious guys, and they're just talking about what they found in the basically the smallest components of matter. They found computer codes, and this brother was made a joke, but he's quite serious. He actually is now, many of these quantum physicists think that now there's probably a 50% chance, they say. It's 50-50 whether or not we live in some sort of simulation. And this brother said that they found computer codes, real computer codes, when they deconstructed string theory. Oh, sorry.
And it's even more bizarre than that, because when you then try to understand these pictures, you find out that buried in them are computer codes, just like the type that you find in a browser when you go surf the web. And so I'm left with the puzzle of trying to figure out whether I live in the Matrix or not.
Wait, you're blowing my mind at this moment. So are you saying your attempt to understand the fundamental operations of nature leads you to a set of equations that are indistinguishable from the equations that drive search engines and browsers on our computers?
That is correct. So
wait, I have to just be silent. So you're saying as you dig deeper, you find computer code writ in the fabric of the cosmos.
into the equations that we want to use to describe the cosmos, yes.
Computer code.
Computer code, strings of bits of ones and zeros.
It's not just sort of resembles computer code. You're saying it is computer code.
It's not even just is computer code. It's a special kind of computer code that was invented by a scientist named Claude Shannon in the 1940s. That's what we find very, very deeply inside the equations that occur in string theory and in general in systems that we say are supersymmetric.
Yeah. And so remember from our first day looking at symbols, one of the quotes from one of the last podcasts of Master Kalindi, which I put over here. The same type of algorithms that are in the soil are also in the stars, because many people postulate that mushroom spores, which are basically immortal in the vacuum of space, permeate the galaxy. And when they find a place that is wholesome for them to be able to grow and flourish, that is what they do. The psilocybin spores came here where they could proliferate and grow from extraterrestrial asteroid impacts. They then found a creature that could decode and deconstruct their information. So basically, what we're going to see is that matter is just made of more matter. Matter is just made of more matter. And before that, it's made of more matter. And before that, it's made of more matter. Where's it come from? It's generated code. Someone is generating the code. Something is generating the code. And that small reality generates the next one on top of it. And that one generates the next one on top of it. It's just computer programs. Computer programs buried beneath computer programs, buried in computer programs. And those are the places that our ancestors were exploring on these trips. So the question is, why does DMT do this? Why does DMT give us access to those places, the worlds before the worlds that are within the worlds, within the worlds, within the worlds? And we think we have some reason to know that. It seems to be photons and atoms. One being, they're all particles, but one being wave, which is basically light, and one being composed of mass. As photons do not have mass, but atoms do. But atoms are what emit photons. So we're going to look at that for a second. And when we look at this for a second, we're going to remember the one most important thing, which is that what is a Moor? We looked at the stelae in our first week class. We spent a lot of time looking at this. And we talked about Moor. As far as we know, the inscriptions going back as far as we can, a Moor was the high priest of Anu. Moor is the high priest of Anu. And what is the high priest of Anu? What is Anu? Anu was the smallest possible particle. the smallest possible component of matter. A Moor was the high priest of Anu. Moors were those people who studied Anu. Moors were those people who studied the smallest possible particles of matter, smallest possible form unit of matter. That's what Moors are. They study that. The priests of Anu. That's what Anu is. So these priests, the priesthoods are a Kemetic concept, not a Christian concept, not a quote unquote Israelite concept. The priesthoods are tens of thousands. We've had those at the beginning. That's before any religion. Priesthoods were first. So that's what the priests were doing. And we looked at what the priests were doing. It's all over the walls of Kemet in the histories of the Dogon. The priests were doing entheogens. Priests of the acacia tree, the mushroom being fed into Asar's mouth by the priests. The mushroom being given to Anubis, who gave it to Asar by the priests. The whole thing that we were looking at in that first class of Kemetic symbols dealt with basically priests and deities ingesting or being the embodiment of psilocybin mushrooms. So that's why we got to look at that when talking about Islamism and its origins. Got to look at that because this is what priests of Anu, this is what Moors are. It appears that modern science is only now coming to recognize the ability of the human body to receive and emit energy and information directly from the light given off from the sun. There's also a growing realization that the sun and moon affect biophoton emissions through gravitational influences. And just remember, gravity is what keeps the planets in orbit with the star or the sun. And gravitons are what they theorize are what keep electrons in the vicinity and orbit of nuclei. What's the difference? Scale. Astronomy, physics, same thing. Gravity holds the planets close to the star. Gravitons or gravitrons hold the electrons close to the nuclei. Recently, biophoton emissions from wheat seedlings in Germany and Brazil were found to be synchronized transcontinentally according to rhythms associated with the lunar solar tide. In fact, the lunar solar tidal force, to which the sun contributes 30% and the moon contributes 60% of the combined gravitational acceleration, has been found to regulate a number of features of plant growth upon Earth. Even human intention itself, the so-called ghost in the machine, may have an empirical basis in biophotons. A recent commentary published in the journal Investigación Clínica entitled Evidence About the Power of Intention addressed this connection. Intention is defined as a directed thought to perform a determined action. Thoughts targeted to an end can affect inanimate objects and practically all living things, from unicellular organisms to human beings. I'm skipping over something here. I don't know if you guys remember the work of the Japanese scientist who studied the effect of human thoughts on water molecules and found that human thoughts created different shapes. Depending on the intent of the thought, water molecules produced shapes that were either perfectly symmetrical with thoughts that were positive, thoughts about love and kindness, words and thoughts about love and kindness, that sort of stuff, and molecules that were asymmetrical and ugly with thoughts that were malevolent in intent, right? And that's what this is referring to here in terms of the effect of thoughts on unicellular organisms, because of course, water is what all these organisms are living in, right? The emission of light particles, biophotons, seems to be the mechanism through which an intention produces its effects. All living organisms emit a constant current of photons as a mean to direct instantaneous, non-local signals from one part of the body to another and to the outside world. Biophotons are stored in the intracellular DNA. Basically, thoughts are photons. What does it say? What does Noble Julie say in chapter of chapter of the Moorish Holy Quran dealing with man and Allah. A man is a thought of Allah. Thoughts are photons. That's what we're dealing with, folks. We're dealing with photons. We're dealing with Anu. We're dealing with waves and mass. We're dealing with photons and atoms. Because a man is a thought of Allah. What is Allah? What is Allah? That is the question that these psilocybin trips have been trying to teach us for hundreds of thousands of years, right? And it's Allah is such a mystery. It's so vast. It will take all of Allah to discover Allah. So it's a never-ending loop of incarnation, manifestation, as we explore Allah more and more. But man is a thought of Allah. Prophet told us that much. We're photons. We are Anu. So when it says, study thyself, or the Prophet says, study. When you ask me, and when you tell me that you studied everything and ask me what you should study next, I will say, study yourself. Because Moors are the priests of Anu, and Anu are photons and atoms, and photons and atoms are what we are. That's what we are. So studying self, studying photons. So what are atoms made of? Our ancestors said that an atom was a solar system. Photons, which are light, are the energy that electrons, which are planets, use to travel from one atom, which is a solar system, to another. So a photon is the energy that an electron uses to create ions. As you know, that's what matter is, right? Basically, a molecule, a hydrogen molecule, an oxygen molecule, an atom, gives and loses electrons, right? Basic chemistry overview. A nucleus or a star has an even number of protons, right, and neutrons, even number. And then it has electrons on the outside of it, keeps in orbit. Now, if it has the same number or more electrons than there are protons, that is a negatively charged atom because there's more electrons. It's an anion, right? If it gains electrons. And it's a cation if it's the opposite. If there are more protons, say it loses an electron, because that's what matter does, right? Molecules come together because they lose one electron to another, because it was, a cation attracts an anion and they form new molecules and things grow, and that's how it works, right? So electrons are always moving between solar systems. Electrons are always moving between atoms. That's what creates photons. Photons are the light emitted when an electron moves, when an ion is created, when a cation is created with a positive charge, or an anion is created with a negative charge. Whenever molecules interact, photons are the energy that electrons use to do that. Electrons use that to travel to whatever atom they're hopping to. And so when ions graze, right? So you've got an atom that jumps to another atom and creates a cation and an anion. And when they come close to each other without colliding, the photons, right, the light that is created when the electron jumps as they graze without colliding, that interacts to produce more matter. That's what scientists say. It produces more matter when the atoms cross without colliding and the photons interact. And the photons are there because the electrons are jumping. The electrons are using the photons to jump. That produces more matter, more solar systems, more dark matter. So within the atoms, there are more atoms being made, basically. It's happening all the time. And atoms are creating their own atoms. It's just going on and on and on, just as far back as you want to go, right? Because remember what we say about Black root science. At the end of a universe, all the atoms, all the solar systems of that universe come together right? All the atoms come together, right, to create the new Earth. The atoms with a lot of electrons, those are the metals. Those are what create the ground, the ground that we walk on. This is called a reverse Big Bang, right, or the rainbow theory of continuum, right? When the Big Bang expand, right, they say the Big Bang, a small atom or whatever blew up, expanded. When it contracts, it all comes back together. It becomes the new Earth of a new universe. And now all those solar systems have become the atoms. The heavy ones form the Earth. The light ones form the atmosphere. You have a new planet, and it starts again, over and over and over. So as far back as you want to go, you just keep finding more solar systems in the solar systems. And I'm sure that we can do a lot of more stuff with the numbers right here. I'm sure Kuju behind these numbers thinking, there's a whole lot of more science in these numbers themselves, right? 12 carbon, 16 hydrogen, 2 nitrogen. Carbon, of course, is 6 electrons. Hydrogen's got 1, and nitrogen's got 7. I put 2 there, but yeah, it's 7, right? So a DMT molecule has all this. It's got 12 carbon molecules, 16 hydrogen molecules, and 2 nitrogen molecules. These are the numbers for them. And so that's basically how universes come together and recycle. And that's what the Kemetic priests were studying, because it's happening in us all the time. It's happening all around us all the time. So I want to just kind of go over that real quick before getting into the actual chemistry that exists in the scriptures, because all the chemistry we're talking about, that stuff is in the scriptures. It's in the scriptures in their own unique ways. And that's what this research paper is going to be looking at today, talking about where in the scriptures this chemistry exists, because it's in there. We're looking at the Torah today, but of course it's in the other ones too. But I want to go with that overview so we understand the importance of what it is that the scriptures and our ancestors were talking about with this entheogen stuff. All right, so we're moving on to the quote-unquote Moorish Israelite connection. We're going to start with Moses, because Moses was unique in the Torah, and Moses, what differentiated him from the other quote-unquote Hebrews, from the Hebrews and the descendants of Jacob, was that Moses was learned in all the ways of the Egyptians, as we know from the story of the book of Exodus. I recommend everybody refamiliarize yourselves with the Torah, because the stories in there are so pertinent to the stuff that we're going to be dealing with in this curriculum, basically. And also, there's just a lot of stuff in there that is also part of Noble Drew Lee's paradigm in the Moorish Holy Quran, right? With Yashim just talked about Kush and that sort of thing. But anyway, talking about Moses, because he was learning all the ways of the Egyptians, and because of that, Moses was given special treatment by Yahweh, and Moses was the only leader who dealt with God face to face. None of the other ones were allowed to. They all had to consult the priests and the use of the Urim and Thummim down here. Urim and Thummim stones or gems to consult with Yahweh and get answers to questions, whereas Moses was allowed to speak to him face to face. Why was Moses so special? Because he was learned in all the ways of the Egyptians, where the other Hebrews were not. And that gave him access to the information.
Pismore,
Islam.
just so because you mentioned it probably
Yeah,
2 times, somebody had asked in the chat, what is a priest with relative to the
Okay. A priest was basically what we call a scientist today. So, for example, they had priests of the acacia tree. What does that mean? It means they're responsible for studying the tree, how to increase its lifespan, how to care for its health, the proportions to use when creating the brew out of the tree's leaves, organizing the information that was received on the trips using the tree's bark, all that sort of stuff. You had priests of everything, basically. So the priests were basically like today's scientists, and they had their own, like today you have academic circles, like you have like, the Heart and Lung Association. Well, you have a heart and lung priesthood, basically, is that how it was, right? You have you have NASA, right? And you have the priests of this and that. So they were just basically, you could say, academic groups or groups of people who studied certain things or who were given the responsibility of overseeing certain things. That's what priests were, basically, right? Not like overseeing city planning and urban things, but overseeing things more of a spiritual and scientific sort of natural world concept or thing. That's what the priesthoods were. And so Moses studied under those priesthoods. So Yahweh was familiar with him. Like I said, the mushroom begins to build a relationship with you after a time. It knows you personally, and it will speak to you like, I wouldn't say necessarily like a friend, but it's familiar with you, and it sort of Terence McKenna called it the logos. Noble Jolie calls it the logos circle 7. The logos in original concept was the voice, right? The words, the wisdom, and that it's that voice that you hear on these trips that sort of guides you through the trip. It'll welcome you back or calm you down, sort of instruct you, sort of guide you, the Holy Ghost, right? That guides you through the Trinity or through whatever it is that you're experiencing and learning on your trip. And sometimes it will ask you what you want to see in that sort of thing, right? And so Moses was familiar with Yahweh because Moses was a priest. He was learning all the ways. He was doing this stuff all the time, which is what we're going to get into, is why the burning bush scene. He's so familiar with the burning bush. He went up there, boom, knew what to do, burnt it up, and ingested the vapor of the harmal, which is an MAO inhibitor, which we'll talk about in this research paper. So yeah, I just wanted to go through this real quick, just as a sort of recap. So Joseph, the son of Israel, became Pharaoh, or second to Pharaoh. They became very, very close. He took an Egyptian wife. And so sometimes you hear in Hebrew Israelite school as well, Egypt was an enemy of the Hebrews. Now, of course, Egypt and Mizraim, what's the difference? Well, name matters, right? We call it Kemet because when the history of Kemet is not the same as history of Egypt. History of Egypt only exists as long as it was called Egypt. It's basically Egyptos. I guess you'd say it was a Greco word, which means burnt land or land of burnt people, land of burnt face, whatever you want to call it. But we call it Kemet. So Egypt only existed as long as it was called Egypt. It was never called Egypt for a long time. We had other names. And so then the turning or the coming into being of Egypt coincided with the invasions probably that were happening in Kemet, and also with basically the fall of Kemet. But basically just my point is probably certain messed up stuff was going down in Kemet, which is the reason why you have these instructions throughout the Torah: do not do as they do in Egypt, because Egypt began to proliferate a whole bunch of deities and gods. You can only imagine what was going on was that these priesthoods, and Bobby Hammett talks about this stuff a lot, these priesthoods were going rogue and probably just interacting with all these different deities that Yahweh didn't like and that were being introduced to them by other people who were taking Entheogens, who were newer to Egypt, like the people who were invading. Right, it's been invaded for thousands of years, on and off, upper Egypt and lower Egypt, right? Lower Egypt being overtaken many times. The uniting of Egypt by, I think his name is Menes. All the stories about Egypt and how much it was invaded in that last 6,000 year time period. It was falling apart, and so you can imagine that spiritual practices began to come up that were not of the original people, and that is probably why you get this sort of disconnect between Pharaoh, who at one point loved the people who came out of Canaan, right? just like Noble Drew Ali said, gave him permission to do things, loved them, and then he came to a priest who, a pharaoh who came to power, who, according to Exodus 1:8, knew not Joseph and did not respect the people who came out of Canaan, and therefore decided to enslave them. In the story, there's obviously a lot of debate about whether that's true or not, allegorical or not. The point is that sort of anti-Egypt paradigm comes out of what was going on in Egypt. It was falling apart. It was falling apart, and it was given up to evil, as you would say, or rulers who were malevolent towards the people and towards the spiritual practices, just taking advantage of stuff, doing all sorts of stuff they shouldn't have been doing, you know? And so anyway, that's my little spiel about Moses and why he's important. And we'll get into some of the stuff more specifically now. Quoting from the research paper, we'll get to the ayahuasca stuff in a second. Definitions of shamanism are contested and problematic, and yet consistencies are observed between societies around the globe and across time. Winckelmann surveyed recognized magical religious practitioners in 47 traditional societies and compiled a list of cultural motifs. Again, this is a paper, Getting High with the Most High, Entheogens in the Old Testament, from the Journal of Psychedelic Studies. The paper was published in 2019 by Danny Nemu primarily, but he had others collaborating with him. Winckelmann surveyed recognized magical religious practitioners in 47 traditional societies and compiled a list of cultural motifs. A dominant social role as a preeminent charismatic leader, which we get in the scriptures. Nighttime community rituals, which we get in the scriptures. Use of chanting, singing, drumming, and dancing, which you get in the scriptures. An initiatory crisis involving a death and rebirth experience, which we get in the scriptures. Shamanic training involving induction of an altered state of consciousness, particularly with fasting and social isolation, which we get in the scriptures. An ASC, or altered state of consciousness experience, characterized as a soul journey, but not possession, which we get in the scriptures. ASC involving visionary experiences, think about Paul on the road to Damascus, which we get in the scriptures. Abilities of divination, diagnosis, and prophecy, which we get in the scriptures. Healing processes focused on soul loss and recovery, which we get in the scriptures. Think about Yahshua. Illness believed to be caused by spirits, sorcerers, and the intrusion of objects or entities. You think of sorcery, right? Which we get in the scriptures. Animal relations as a source of power, including control of animal spirits, which we get in the scriptures, thinking mostly about older scriptures like the epics of Gilgamesh, or the Ramayana, or the Mahabharata, those types of older, the Iliad, the Odyssey, those older sort of forms of scriptures, depending on the culture that you're in, right? So you get those too. You get some, I guess, as well in the Torah. I guess you could think about, not the Torah, but the Tanakh, right? Job and the whale down in the lion's den. Yeah. So you get sacrificing animals, right, to please the gods, to please Yahweh, right? The golden calf. You get this sort of stuff in the scriptures. The ability of the shaman to transform into animals. Malevolent acts or sorcery, including the ability to kill others, scriptures. Hunting magic, assistance in acquiring animals for food, that you get in the scriptures, right? Exodus, Yahweh guiding the Israelites to game, right, in the wilderness. All that sort of stuff, right? All the definitions of shamanism are prevalent throughout the scriptures in every single book, basically written across time, in every single religious paradigm, all of them, pretty much. I don't care what it is, man. Buddhism, Confucianism, Zoroastrianism, with looking at Mithra, the Rama Hindustan paradigm, right? Islam. These things they're all things that you encounter in the scriptures when looking at shamanism or the aspects of shamanism. Nearly every item appears in the legends of Moses and his siblings. And again, this paper goes on to say whether they existed is immaterial. The literature demonstrates that the Israelites were familiar with shamanistic tropes. Moses is initiated into his special relationship with Yahweh during an ASC, or altered state of consciousness, with visionary experiences at the burning bush. Exodus 3, verse 2. Let's take a look at Exodus. I found my Torah, by the way, from last week. I couldn't find it. Found it, man, just in time. Exodus 3, verse 2. Let's read that real quick. What do we get there? Now Moses, tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, drove the flock into the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. An angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire out of a bush. He gazed, and there was a bush all aflame, yet the bush was not consumed. Altered state of consciousness. And Yahweh prophesies that he will lead the Israelites to freedom, and this occurs during that state. I mean, I could read all this, but shoot, here. This gives us an idea of what our priesthoods were doing and what they were charged with, because like I said, the priesthoods would go into the darkness, come out, and be responsible for giving Pharaoh and the people information. Before there was even Pharaoh, when the mushrooms became scarce the first time, because, and we're going to look at Kemet here as the primary example, but obviously Kemet was over here in this part of the world too, prior to the flood, which was caused by, of course, the asteroid shower, which induced the Younger Dryas, right? But regardless, the grasslands began appearing on Earth because the climate of Earth became drier and drier in response to the cataclysms that had taken place. First, with the great asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs, that created a climate change that reverberated for millions of years. And then later on, again, there have been several of them. One hit South Africa, I think, was 3,000 years ago, and another one, the one that that induced the Younger Dryas, that hit the Americas terribly, again, about 12,000 years ago, 9 to 12,000 years ago, right? The falling of Atlantis. Atlantis was sunk because of meltwater pulse 1A and 1B, which in the literature was a flood. The flood created by the melting of the glaciers that had existed during the Ice Age, meltwater pulse 1A and 1B. In the north, the heat generated by the asteroids, as well as the asteroids colliding into the ocean, created not only the melting of the icebergs, but huge tidal waves, 1,000 meters, 10,000 meters high. The ocean level was raised to a never before seen extent, and there was flooding all over the world. There were even the Sphinx shows in the book from Raymond Hancock has a book called The Magicians of the Gods, and he talks about the Sphinx having marks on it from erosion that could only have occurred via water damage, dated 15,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago. What happened? There was a worldwide flooding from these calamities that occurred, right? And so, yeah, my point being that the continent became drier and drier, and the mushrooms, as they became scarcer and scarcer, what happens? Well, if me, Cujo, and everyone in the temple, there's not enough to go around, then I'm going to say, okay, Cujo, you're the Grand Sheik. You pick one other guy, and you guys take all the mushrooms, and you guys tell us what God said, because there's not enough to go around anymore to share. You know what I'm saying? If there's only 50 grams to go around, well, if we share that, no one gets high enough to hear God. So you guys take it, so you guys get high enough, and then you guys tell us what God said. And so that's how the priesthood started. That's how they first started. And so, of course, this is how it would go down. Cujo will go into the darkness and come back out, and something like this would happen, right? He would say, they will listen to you. Then you shall go with the elders of Israel to the king of Egypt, and you shall say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, manifested himself to us. Now, therefore, let us go a distance of 3 days into the wilderness to sacrifice to the Lord our God. Yet I know that the king of Egypt will let you go only because of a greater might. So I will stretch out my hand and smite Egypt with various wonders, which I will work upon them. After that, he should let you go. So basically, he goes into the wilderness. Moses encounters this burning bush, which we're going to talk about. Hears God, receives instructions, and lives them out. And that's the sort of stuff that was going on in Egypt with small cults that were just tearing it down, basically. So anyway, going back to the research paper, although Moses complains that he is not up to the task of challenging Pharaoh, Yahweh promises to act as an ally and give him charisma and eloquence. You guys should read the Iliad and the Odyssey. These are 3,000-year-old stories, of course, coinciding exactly the same time of the Torah, but they're Greco-Roman in origin, and they're basically called today the basis of all Western literature. And in the Iliad and Odyssey, there's a lot of allusion to ambrosia and the foods of the gods, and ambrosia being shared with humans. And the whole concept of the Iliad is, you guys have seen the movie Troy, right? Movie Troy, you know, where the Trojans basically kidnap a Greek princess, and then the Greeks retaliate by sending all their army to Troy. And then, of course, they fight over the right to keep this queen. And that's the movie Troy, right? And you know, Brad Pitt plays Achilles, and Eric Benet plays Hector. Well, they don't show this in the movie, but in the books, the fighting is not between just men. Actually, the gods come down and they take sides. And some of the gods give power to the Trojans, and some of the gods give power to the Greeks. And so the gods have favorites. They have men who they love, men who they've been in love with. You know, when it says in the book of Genesis that the sons of God fell in love with the daughters of men, this is what was going on. Gods and men were interacting. And in the Iliad and Odyssey, the gods take up arms and fight alongside men and women because they have favorites who they love. And the gods and humans are always working together or against each other. And so it's the same exact thing. Moses goes, yo, man, I'm not going to Pharaoh to tell him that your people go. Are you insane? He's gonna kill me. And what God goes, don't worry about it, man. I'll be by your side protecting you. And he gets to Egypt, and the Pharaoh's like, well, I'm not giving up my boys. I'm not giving up my slave crew. And you can show me all the powers of your God. I have gods too. And what do Pharaoh's gods do? They turn into snakes. And God goes, don't worry, bro. I got your back. Turn me into a snake. Boom. And he turns him into a snake. And the snakes fight. And of course, Yahweh eats up the Pharaoh snakes. But the point is that everybody's got gods on their side intermixing with the humans, right? And that is the same concept that was going on with the Entheogens, because our ancestors were interacting with the entities that they met on these trips, and all of them were different. Some were benevolent, some were not. Some would ask for things. Some would say, yo, do this. Some would say, yo, do that. Some would say, don't worry, I'll help you do this. Don't worry, do this for me and I'll do this. Sacrifice bulls to me. So that's sort of the dynamic in theory that was going on here in terms of these deities, because the deities are real. The deities were encountered on the trips. And of course, the priesthoods, who were becoming multiple, had their own, right? Some temples were to Nut, some temples were to Ra, some temples were to Heru, some temples were to Tahuti, some temples were to whoever. This is what was going on. So anyway, Moses mediates between Yahweh and the tribe, sometimes presenting his utterances in song. And his sister Miriam, the prophetess, follows his songs with her own, playing percussion, leading a dance, like we said, rituals. Moses also instigates 3 nighttime rituals per year. And that's in Exodus 23, 14 to 16. Let's take a look at that real quick. Exodus 23, 14 to 16, right? Yeah. 3 times a year you will hold a festival for me. You shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, eating unleavened bread for 7 days, as I have commanded you, at the set time in the month of Abib. For in it you went forth from Egypt, and none shall appear before me empty-handed. And the feast of the harvest of the fruits of your work, of what you sow in the field, and the feast of ingathering at the end of the year, when you gather in the results of your work from the field. 3 times a year, all your males shall appear before the sovereign, the Lord. You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with anything unleavened. So basically, God is demanding sacrifices for his work in helping the Hebrews get out of Egypt. And one of the things Master Quindy always said was that the priesthoods got greedy in Egypt. This is how the fall began. The priesthoods didn't have to work. They didn't have to farm. They didn't have to teach students, like, teachers teaching math. They didn't have to do that. They didn't have to build anything. They didn't have to build towers or temples, or they weren't accountants. They didn't have to do carpentry. The priesthoods didn't have to work. Why? Because you can't work if you're stoned all day. You know what I'm saying? You can't work. You can't farm after a 40-gram trip in psilocybin. The next day, all you can hope to do is lie there and just recover from the crazy, wild nonsense that just went down. And you can't even move. You're just on the couch, basically, all day, exhausted because you didn't sleep all night, because you can't sleep. Right? CNS arousals. You had a horrible trip probably, and you didn't sleep. You had all this information. You're just cooked. And so they didn't have to work. So when they realized they didn't have to work, they're like, "Oh shoot, man! We can't work, but we still have to eat. So you guys have to bring us food." Sound familiar? How familiar does that sound to what we're talking about here with Yahweh and the priesthood and sacrificing the bulls and the rams and the lambs to God, so he could smell their aroma? That's what is literally to the Torah, right? Does that sound familiar? The priests were like, "Well, we can't work, so we can't make no paper. So we can't farm because we're doing the mushroom stuff. So you guys got to bring food to us." So then it was like, "Oh, the corn god said we need more corn." The potato god said we need more potatoes, because he's the one who kept the fathom, told us how to keep the pesticide, the potatoes from having a famine this year. So now we owe that god some of the potatoes. So you got to give us more potatoes now. And that's what went down. It's no different than what was happening in the Torah. It's just priesthoods demanding food for sacrifice. It's the same thing that was going on 10,000 years before it.
It also sounds like taxes.
Yo, taxes. You know what I'm saying? You gotta pay. Everybody has to pay a little bit to us so we can govern and tell you guys what God said to do. Collecting coins or collecting morsels. Everyone gives us a portion. All the farmers give us a portion of their wheat. It's basically what was going on. You know what I mean? With the priesthoods. And as you know, greed begets greed, man. Greed begets greed. No taxation without representation. And it wasn't long before these priesthoods stopped working for the people and just began working for themselves, going rogue and stuff. And that's when Kemet just fell apart. Yeah. So let's move on and talk about Moses on Mount Sinai. Is that where we are now? Yep. We're talking about Moses on Mount Sinai, guys. That's what we're going to look at, the ayahuasca analog. First, when Moses went up to Mount Sinai to receive the instructions from God, to receive the contract, to receive the 10 Commandments from God, he was there with Yahweh 40 days and 40 nights. He did neither eat bread nor drink water. And he wrote upon the tables the words of the alliance, the 10 phrases. Exodus 34:28. 10 Commandments. Medicine men of the Amazon jungle or Siberian plains go into their huts alone to encounter their familiar spirits. The high priest enters the Holy of Holies alone to commune with Yahweh before the Ark of the Covenant. We're going to talk about the Ark of the Covenant and the acacia tree in a little bit. Israelite priests, like some shamans, used plant preparations entheogenically. Did you hear that? The research paper says that Israelite priests, like some shamans, used plant preparations entheogenically to facilitate the encounter, to trigger visionary, auditory, and other ASC experiences of divinity. The complex mixtures of holy ointment and holy incense will be examined, along with manna and the showbread. So that's what this paper is going to examine. The chemistry of the tabernacle, the chemistry of the holy ointment given to David, given to Moses, given to Jesse, given to all these guys, given to Joseph, given to the high priest. What's in it? What's in the holy ointment? We're going to talk about that right now. But first, we're going to talk about Moses and the burning bush and ayahuasca. The Old Testament entheogenic hypothesis. The implications of entheogen use in the Bible go beyond ethnographic curiosity. The Old Testament and its daughters, the New Testament and the Quran, continue to guide the philosophical orientation of many people today and are influential standards for proper conduct in morality, politics, and law. And don't forget commerce, right? Because all commerce, the base of commerce, gold and silver use, and the right, which is the only real money to this day, in exchange for goods and to settle the payment of debts, comes from the scripture. The scripture produces the maxims of law. The maxims of law produce the common law. The common law is what's used to create statutes, right? The statutes are created out of common law. Statutes are there to clarify common law in certain contexts, specific contexts that may not have shown up, right? Statutes are used to contextualize common law. That's what it goes from scripture to maxims to common law to statutes to bylaws and all the other bullshit that they use. But the common law and the scriptures are the basis, right? And those statutes, which are unconstitutional, which are struck down, are statutes that are not what? Do not respect the common law. So that's the relationship between law and scripture. And of course, now we know law and entheogens and commerce and entheogens, because this is the basis of the scriptures. Entheogens produce scriptures, scriptures produce maxims of law produce the common law produces the statutes, which run admiralty, which run the exchange of goods, right? Barter. They say commerce is international trade, basically, and trade is local trade, right? And admiralty is basically the rules that were used because in order to engage in commerce, you had to travel on the water across the continent or across large bodies of water to get to other lands to trade. So this is the basis of that stuff. Given the brutal reality of the war on drugs and the continuing human interest in mystical experiences, drugs, and scripture, it's no surprise that several attempts have been made to mine the Bible for evidence of entheogens. Before presenting my own evidence, I will review some other publications. So here's one from the ayahuasca analog. This is from Shannon, from a paper published in 2008. I had the paper. I'm happy to share it if y'all want this paper, but let's get into it. Shannon proposed that an ayahuasca analog was made by brewing one of the locally abundant DMT-containing acacia species with Peganum harmala, which contains the monoamine oxidase, MAO, right, inhibitor, harmaline. The pineal gland produces harmaline. Harmaline inhibits the monoamine oxidase from destroying DMT. Peganum harmala, or harmala, is harmal in Arabic. Ooh. Let's look at this. What is harmal in Arabic? Harmal or al-harmal is the wild root, the Syrian root. It's a plant. Is it a coincidence that al-harmal and harmaline are the same word, are the same sound? A word is just a sound that defines something. Is it a coincidence that harmal and al-harmal are the same sound, or the same word? Let's look at what Muhammad said about harmal. He said, the wild root, harmal, al-harmal, does not grow a tree or a leaf or a fruit, but that it has an angel in charge of it until it reaches the one who comes to it. or until it becomes debris, so decays. In its root and branches is a secret. That's what Moses encountered. He countered the plant that has an angel in charge of it until it reaches the one who comes to it. Moses is the one who came to the Syrian Rue. That is the reason why, and he was able to do that because he came from the priesthoods and knew exactly what it was. And that's why Yahweh treated Moses uniquely. That's why Yahweh said, that's why it says there arose not a prophet since in Israel like unto Moses, whom Yahweh knew face to face. And we'll get into more quotes in our next curriculum about this and its relationship to the tree of life and the prophets, right? But the point is that Moses, the one learned in all the ways of the Egyptian, encountered the Syrian Rue, went to the Syrian Rue, and it had an angel in charge of it for him, because he knew that in its roots and branches there was a secret. Pi Harmala is Harmal in Arabic, and Shannon relates the word to cherem or harem, which means taboo in Hebrew, and also the Arabic haram or haram, that means both taboo and sacred. The biblical acacia is called shittim, derived from shotet, meaning to pierce, which describes what DMT does to the veil of everyday reality, as of course well as what the acacia thorns do to the skin. Whatever it was, and the species it disputed, it was the most exalted wood used to construct the Ark of the Covenant. Exodus 26:15. Let's take a look and see what it says. You shall make the planks for the tabernacle of acacia wood upright. That's what it says in the Torah. Why does Yahweh demand that wood be used particularly? The Talmud, which is a collection of oral folklore and law written down from the 1st century AD, we all know about the Talmud, also relates the esteemed shittim to shah, meaning nonsense, a rather irreverent pun that makes more sense if the psychedelic effects of DMT are considered. The Talmud also records a serenade, which is a song. Sing, O sing, shittim tree, ascend in all thy gracefulness. With golden weave they cover thee. The sanctuary place hears thy eulogy. Given that wood neither sings nor eulogizes, this poem might contain veiled references to the entheogenic use of shittim, or perhaps the rising smoke of shittim incense triggering clairaudient effects. I would add Shannon's hypothesis evidence formed from the Islamic tradition. Harmaline, al-Harmal, the wild rue. Harmal expels devils and averts misfortune, according to one hadith. And whoever takes a mythqual, 4.25 grams of Harmal, there's a chemistry right there, right? There's a science. Whoever takes a dose of 4.2 grams of Harmal in water for 40 mornings each day, that's a recipe. 4 grams of Harmal in water each day. It's a recipe. So shall wisdom enlighten his heart, and he shall be healed of immune to 72 diseases. Shannon cites verses that suggest two psychedelic phenomena. One is a fire that burns upon objects but does not consume. That's what the bush was, which he interprets as a visual metaphor for the brilliant patterns that blaze around objects in psychedelic states. You'll see them. The other is synesthesia, or the mixing of sense modalities. And all the people are seeing the voices and the flames and the sound of the trumpet. Exodus 20:18. I won't read that one for the purpose of time, but you get the concept. The people, the Israelites, are seeing the voices and the flames and the sounds of the trumpet when in the tabernacle, because of what's in the tabernacle. We're going to talk about that just now. While an ayahuasca analog may have been used in the ancient Middle East, there was no direct evidence of it in the Bible, no known reference to Pi Harmala at all. Some psychoactive ingredients may have gone unreported, certainly, as much of the oral tradition has been lost. So there's a lot more, but we're going to move on from ayahuasca, because now the burning bush is not ayahuasca. The burning bush is harmala, paganum harmala. But my point is that ayahuasca, what is it? Ayahuasca is what is the brew we used to recreate the mushroom when the mushroom became scarce, because ayahuasca is a DMT and an MAO inhibitor. In the same fashion, paganum harmala is also an MAO inhibitor because it's composed of harmaline. If you combine that with the acacia tree and the plants of the acacia tree that were so prevalent among the Israelites, you get an ayahuasca, you get a DMT experience. Furthermore, just being around a burning bush, just being around the Syrian root, which is the inhibitor, will give you the effects, because your own DMT production is going to increase because you're not being inhibited anymore by MAO. So there are two very powerful entheogenic compounds, especially together, but also on their own. And that is what we see a lot of in the Israelite tradition of Moses and the tabernacle, and Moses' encounter with Yahweh. It involved either harmal or the acacia, or both. Let's look at ergo next. Manna. The ergo fungus parasitizes a range of plants and produces a secretion that contains ergotamine. That's where the word ergo comes from. Although it can be toxic, the powerful visionary D-lysergic acid amide, LSA, can be prepared from it. Hoffman, who used ergo to synthesize lysergic acid, commented, "The separation of the hallucinogenic agents by simple water solution from the non-soluble ergotamine and ergotoxin alkaloids was well within the range of possibilities open to early man." So what he's saying is separation of the entheogenic compounds was within the abilities of Paleo-Americans. Early men were doing this. Early men knew the effects of psilocybin and entheogenic properties because they encountered them in nature, and they were very, very much accustomed to separating them in nature and consuming them in a way that would get them the experience. They were already doing this. The Bible describes this process by people who ground it, talking about manna. Remember manna in the book of Exodus that the Israelites were eating in the desert. They were eating manna, right? Describes this process by people who ground it in mills or beat it in a mortar. That's the book of Numbers. Merkel also argues that this process would extract psychoactive alkaloids from ergo, and how manna was like coriander seed and looked like resin. That's from the scripture, Numbers 11:7. Or elsewhere, it was described as being white, like coriander seed, and tasted like wafers made with honey. That's Exodus 16, verse 31. The honeydew that ergo produces tastes like honey. So they're describing ergo when they're talking about manna in the opinion of these professors and these scientists. This is what these scholars, this is what scholarship is showing is in the scriptures, that the manna was a psychoactive fungi called ergo that produced a honeydew that looked, and that the honeydew dried on the plant like small resinous white pellets, roughly the size of coriander seeds, just like it says in the scripture in Numbers 11, verse 7. And is also described as thin flakes like frost on the ground in Exodus 16:14. But that also describes ergo, because the honeydew that ergo produces, it splashes where it drips and dries as a thin white frosty scale. So they talk a lot here about what ergo is, or what it seems to be in terms of scholarship. let's go on and talk a bit more about it. There's a lot in this paper that deals with the parts of the scripture that we talked about in terms of the description of ergo and the etymology of the word manna. But we're just going to move on because the premise of it is already becoming pretty self-evident. So let's look at another interesting point of this. What is said about manna. Let no man leave of it till the morning. Notwithstanding, they hearkened not unto Moses, but some of them left it until the morning, and it bred worms and stank. So this is another indication that they are indeed talking about ergo, because such rapid decay supports the thesis of ergo infection, as does the fact that heat, which the Israelites were because they were living in the desert, arrests the infection. And he said unto them, tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto Yahweh. Bake that which ye will bake today, and boil that ye will boil, and lay up what is left over till the morning. And they laid it up till the morning, as Moses bade, and it did not stink, neither was there any worm therein. So heat tended to be a preservative for the manna in certain contexts. The environmental context also supports Merker, the person who published this research on ergo and manna. Ergo emerges from dormancy at the onset of spring, which is when the Israelites first encounter it. In the scripture, they encounter it in the springtime, according to research papers in 1999, and that also is evident in Exodus 16:1, and when that's investigated in another research paper. Furthermore, a parasitic fungus requires vegetation and therefore water. Manna is not found in the wilderness of Shur, which is dry, but in the wilderness of Sin, where there is water. Manna is not the only food the Israelites find, as quails also come to ground every night to be rounded up. This is more remarkable than a plant secretion, not unlike others known to desert peoples. And yet only manna is called angel food, which is evident in Psalm 78:25, when manna or ergo was called angel food. Why is it called that? Perhaps this is not because it comes from the angels, but because people who eat it encounter angels. Yeah. So anyway, lots of stuff there dealing with what the manna was. The manna to be seen. Moses said, let's read another verse. Moses said unto Aaron, take a pot of manna and put an omer full of manna therein, and lay it up before Yahweh to be kept for your generations, as Yahweh commanded Moses. So Aaron laid it up before the testimony to be kept. The manna to be seen ends up hidden behind veils in the inner chamber of the tabernacle. Stranger still, the command is issued and followed, even though the tabernacle has not yet been constructed. Textual scholars conclude that this line is an interpolation introduced to text at a later date. The Merker reason that this is because the entheogenic experience became off limits to the general population. Ergo can be cultivated in pots, and the priestly caste could have it kept to themselves, while for everyone else there was no longer any manna for the Israelites. That's from Joshua 5:12. So once again, we find a repeat of what was happening in Egypt. The priesthoods became greedy and began to hog this manna to themselves. Now, it clearly wasn't regular food, because the people would starve if that was the case. Clearly, they were hogging it to themselves because of the entheogenic experience, and there was not always a ton of it to go around. So, as regards ergo, there's more stuff, but I think we get the point on that. I want to move on to the ointment before we call it a lesson here, and move on to the question and answer period. Tabernacle wine. Psychoactive alkaloids were extracted into wine in ancient Greek, Chinese, and Saxon, and many other cultures. Escochado hypothesizes that the story of Lot impregnating his daughters while drunk only makes sense if we know that story about Lot, right? Because that deals directly with the Moabites, right? And the relationship to the Israelites. Some sort of admixture was added to the wine, analogous to the Egyptian nepenthes, though distinct in composition, capable of giving Lot the extraordinary energy required to overcome the taboo of incest, provoking total unconsciousness and hyperactivity at the same time. Psilocybin, right? Very, very powerful sexual urges, but you have no control over yourself because you're pretty much just knocked out. Amnesia and complete ethical insensitivity, while allowing a considerable feat for an elderly man to deflower and impregnate 2 maidens on successive nights without even realizing it. Woo! All of you will encounter this in your first high dose when you basically, will there be a period of time, either before or after, probably towards the end after, where you can't get sex off the mind. You know, you can't get rid of your erection no matter what you did. Or sorry, not even erection, but just the sexual energy is so powerful. You'll see that. Let's look at Proverbs now. Ointment and incense rejoice the heart. Read Proverbs 27:9, where the word for rejoice, samach, also describes the effect of wine in Judges 9:13. I will argue that the mood-altering and entheogenic effects of ointment and incense derive from their psychopharmacology. So, of course, in communion, you drink the wine, right? Which is the blood of Christ, which is the Christ, which is the ointment. And this is where we come to what that ointment is, essentially. And we'll get to that, Christianity's point, placing all this in our next cycle. But let's talk about the holy ointment. Take thou also unto thee principal spices of myrrh, 500 shekels, of sweet cinnamon, half so much, even 250 shekels, and of cannabosum, 250 shekels, and of cassia, 500 shekels, after the shekel of the sanctuary, and of oil and an inn. And thou shalt make it an oil of holy ointment. An ointment, remember the word anoint, to anoint somebody, is the same thing as an ointment, right? To anoint somebody is to apply anointment on them. You get it? Anoint, anointment, right? To anoint a priest, to anoint a leader, to anoint a prophet, you have to rub them with anointment. That's what it means to anoint somebody. So that's what it meant to anoint somebody, was to provide them with anointment. What ointment? This ointment. An ointment compound after the art of the apothecary. The art of the apothecary, where was that learned? From the man who was learned in all the ways of the Egyptians. Then Shammah took the horn of oil and anointed, massaged him in the midst of his brethren. And the spirit of Yahweh came upon David from that day forward. Oh! Everyone knows the story of David. Why was he so close to God? He was anointed with the ointment. When he was anointed with that ointment, when they rubbed that oil on him, Yahweh came upon him from that day forward. And ye shall not go out from the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, lest ye die, for the anointing oil of Yahweh is upon you. We're going to talk about this relationship in Genesis. Remember Genesis? Don't eat that plant unless you want to die. If you eat that plant, you will die. We're going to get to that stuff in the next cycle, but the way it says, for the anointing oil of Yahweh is upon you. Thy plants are an orchard of pomegranates with pleasant fruits, henna with spikenard and saffron, cane and cinnamon, with all trees of frankincense, myrrh, and agar wood, with all the chief spices. Song of Songs, written, that's 4:13:14, that's the Torah. This holy ointment was a specific Kemetic concoction that was exported by the Kemetic people from the apothecaries. Exodus 30:23-24, right? Thou shalt make it an oil of holy anointment after the art of the apothecary. The holy ointment was a Kemetic concoction exported by the Kemetic people from the apothecaries, the art of apothecary in the Middle Ages. That's from Ageneta, 1847. This is a big text. You guys can look up, and I can forward it to y'all when I after the class. I look for it and I find the book. Probably look at it, probably be, who knows how much money on Amazon, but you can find this book. This is it. And this recipe was in this, or the allusion to this recipe was in, it was known by modern scholarship as far as back then, is my point. Right? This ointment came out of Kemet. The specific recipe right here. Let's get into the ingredients though. Yeah, let's get into the ingredients, man. The constituents of the holy ointment. You had myrrh, you had cinnamon, you had kene balsam, you had cassia. Yeah, all that stuff. But let's just get into the breakdown of what was in these in this stuff. So the ointment contained myrrh, cinnamon, and cassia, and also scholars believe cannabis sativa. Cannabis sativa contains tetrahydrocannabinol and cannabidiol, so THC and CBD, and a wide range of phytocannabinoids, as well as neurolidol and phytol. Also present in them, in cannabis sativa, are various terpenes found in myrrh, cinnamon, and cassia. Myrrh, cinnamon, and cassia are the specific things that are in the ointment instructed to the Israelites by Yahweh. Right here. Cannabis balsam contains THC and CBD and a wide range of phytocannabinoids. Myrrh contains among its components large amounts of, I'm not going to try to describe that. Y'all get the point. Cinnamon contains, y'all get the point. But what are these things that it contains? Now we're going to get into it. Mixtures of the constituents. This is from the research paper itself right here, titled Synergistic Interactions of These Compounds that are given to the Israelites. These compounds, when combined together and vaporized or burned, produce entheogenic effects of a totally different order to the ingredients taken alone. So, reading through this, cinnamon increases the bioavailability of co-administered drugs by the inhibition of PGP or cytochrome. This paper talks about that. Critical to entheogenic psychedelic properties of myrrh and cassia, because these constituents are usually broken down by P450s. 99% of them are involved in roughly 99% of P450 mediated drug metabolism. Cinnamon reduces 4 of them. And the 5th is inhibited by the coumarin in cassia, which reduces its activity by over 90%. So when you combine these compounds together that Yahweh instructed, it was known that adding the cinnamon allows the entheogenic effects of cassia and cassia bosom to be to increase exponentially. It's basically the effect. It allows the THC and the myrrh and whatever's in the myrrh to have a much more powerful entheogenic effect. You wouldn't get it with those things taken alone. But the cinnamon acts like an MAO inhibitor, you would say, or an inhibitor, whatever breaks down in those two properties. And mixing these properties in the exact numbers given here in Exodus was an entheogenic compound for these reasons exported out of Kemet. P450 functions has a profound effect on how drugs interact with the body. So the inhibition of both enzymes would increase the duration and effect of cannabis. And we all know the history of what cannabis was used for before today. And of course, he goes on to talk about pomegranate, which is in the fruits, right? that we looked at here a second ago. The orchard of pomegranates. Let's get into it. The enzymes of pomegranate could profoundly affect the altered state occasioned by a mixture of resins. Henna is traditionally used as an aphrodisiac. Psilocybin, of course, and eaten in quantity would contribute to the psychoactive potential of the other substances, just like psilocybin does. The tabernacle would have been saturated as the volatile oils would have emitted a constant evaporation and made the air rich in psychoactive chemicals, many having a high bioavailability via pulmonary intake, so via inhalation. Ark and censer. The only object allowed within was constructed in the manner of other smoke chambers of the ancient world, where psychoactive materials were imbibed by fumigation. So we'll get into this stuff next time. This is the last page, but the ark and censer, whose construction were mandated by Yahweh, were constructed in a manner, according to this research paper, in this book, constructed in a manner of a smoke chamber. That's what they were. The tabernacle was basically a smoke chamber full of entheogenic vapor, or you could say vapor or smoke, rich in psychoactive chemicals. And the ark that the tabernacle is in is a smoke chamber. It's constructed in the manner of other smoke chambers of the ancient world, where psychoactive materials were imbibed with fumigation. In other words, in other parts of the world, Cameron included, they used chambers to filter and access a psychoactive environment. It was a common thing in the ancient world, where they had smoking chambers where you walked in, you could inhale and receive the psychoactive experience. And the ark and censer were built in the same exact way. So I know it was late today, and I'm sorry about that. We kind of spit over this stuff quickly, but point is that the Torah, as it turns out, and as Kuja will tell you, is really dealing with astrology and, bigger pictures, the bigger picture of mythology and history, and allegory. Those are instructions. Those are entheogenic instructions that were recorded for us and that Moses gave to Israelites, that Moses received from the Syrian Rue, which was an MAO inhibitor in Mount Horeb, where the Syrian Rue grows, if you study the literature on the Syrian Rue, which we can get into another time. We talked about in our very, very first lecture. So Moses gets it from the Syrian Rue, passes it on to the Israelites, who create a vapor out of it and who will create an oil out of it. And they wipe that oil now after Moses passes, because remember, Yahweh is no longer dealing with them one-on-one. Only Moses got that treatment, nobody else. So now for these other coming leaders and prophets and patriarchs, they have to receive the oil that Moses gave them to rub on themselves to receive Yahweh's message. It's in the scriptures, it's in the literature, and there's lots of this is only one paper. There's lots of papers referenced through this, dealing with these passages and dealing with scholars of the ancient world, talking about the entheogen compounds in the Torah Tanakh. And that's just the Torah Tanakh. There's other books too. So yeah, that's it for today. That's the class. Sorry, Kujano, I know you're cooked, and we appreciate you volunteering your time. I know you just keep coaching. You got long days, brother. And I was late today, so I apologize for that. But that's basically today's class on looking at the proof of Islamism, the esoteric original understanding of Islamism, the priests of Anu, the studying of photons, the studying of atoms, the studying of solar systems, the studying of reality embedded in reality, which produces and generates the computer codes, which create the new reality on the new reality on the new reality that we just saw from Neil deGrasse Tyson. All of that stuff is recorded in the scriptures. It's in there, man. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, because we got a lot more classes. We'll be digging into this stuff a lot more, because it's It's in a lot more than just this part of the Torah, right? We got lots of other books to explore and look at. Anyway, that's it for today. All right, Q&A time. I know it was an hour and a half. That's normal time, I guess. My fault for being late. So yeah, let's get to work.
You got any questions? Just put it in the chat, and we'll go from there. Just scrolling through right now, see what's in here. I don't know if this is relative, but someone was asking about the acacia bush on the Federal Reserve notes. I guess that's the US note has an acacia bush on it. Is the tabernacle room a smoke chamber? What are your thoughts on Isaiah 14:25? And somebody, can you join the Moors? Can you join the Moors if you're white? So can you join the Moors if you're white? You could send that question to Canaanlandguide@gmail.com. We got a Q&A. We got a Q&A every Wednesday. We got a Q&A every Wednesday that you can ask that question for Wednesday.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
the
acacia,
guys. It's not about complexion. Here's a hint. It's not about complexion. Yeah. Anyway, Isaiah 14:25, to break Assyria in my land, to crush him on my mountain, and his yoke shall drop off them, and his burden shall drop from their backs. Okay. Well, what about that verse is your question? Do you mean, okay, I see what you're saying. I see what they're saying. Yeah. In basically what this means, and we didn't have time to talk about the book of Genesis today, but even Adam did not communicate with the Lord until he ingested the fruit. You know what I'm saying? Commands were given in terms of what Eden was going to be, in terms of the biological instructions a man was going to fulfill, but there was no communication, there was no interaction between Yahweh and the Lord until he ingested the quote unquote fruit. Only after ingesting the compound was their communication, was now they speaking to one another. So anytime you have deities or prophets who are receiving information from a deity, we're saying that that's Islamism in practice. That is going into the numinosum, where the deities exist and give us instruction. So yes, anytime there's interaction between the Lord and any prophet, that's how they're receiving it, because they're being anointed. Remember, after Moses, they were all anointed. It was the priests, the priesthood, the Levi priests in particular, who were responsible for upkeep and communication with Yahweh. This is how they did it. So yes. Facts. The product, not the ritual. Exactly. It's the product. It's the ritual is just the context of the product. But it's the product. That's right. Anything else? So occasional Federal Reserve notes, yeah, man. I mean, shoot. It's masonry, right? Those notes are masonry. So yeah, of course the Masons know what's going on. Remember we went over the Masonic symbol, how it's just an inverted mushroom? It's the SARS mushroom symbol upside down, basically. Exactly the same thing. It's gonna be an accident. Basically who they learned it from. Yeah.
Oh, correction. The verse was Isaiah 19, 24, 25. Isaiah 19, 24, 25.
Isaiah 19.
No worries. You're good.
Okay. It says, in that day, Israel shall be a third party with Egypt and Assyria as a blessing on earth. Ooh. For the Lord of hosts will bless them, saying, blessed be my people Egypt, my handiwork Assyria, and my very own Israel. So basically, Joseph goes into Egypt, and Joseph is Israel. He's the son of Israel. He goes into Egypt and basically impresses Pharaoh so much that Pharaoh basically says, well, you're Egyptian now. You're going to be my main right. You're my right hand man. And your people are going to have lands. I'm going to give you guys lands here. Take them over, and you're my advisor. And now, I pass a lot of our sort of our rulership over to you. He became Pharaoh eventually. And of course, down the line, you have new pharaohs who come and go, and then of course, one day a pharaoh shows up who decides that he doesn't like the Hebrews anymore. But all throughout the book of Genesis, the Egyptians and the Israelites are super tight, man. They look exactly the same. They share land. They share food. They help each other. They're very, very close. They intermarry. They're very, very close. So yeah, I mean, this was going on. We were teaching. The whole world was learning from our systems that we had, including our own people. So they're like different people, just different genealogies separate and they come out together. They separate and come out together. So, we integrated Israel, and they were receiving the same treatment that our own people were receiving. So this is, all these prophecies about these nations are about people coming back together eventually, right? The Great Divide and things in the prophecy in the end all come back together, right? Everything comes back together. There's peace in the Holy Land in the end because the Canaanites come back, right? It says in the Bible, I think Genesis 9:27 or Jeremiah 30:10, there's no peace in Israel right now, Middle East, because the original people are not there. When they come back, there will be peace. And it says in 9:27, it says, I'm going to greatly enlarge Japheth, and Japheth shall dwell in the tents of Shem. Who's Shem? Shem are the Shemitic people, our people, right? The dark-skinned people. Who are the Japhethites? Japheth are those whose descendants became pale. I shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tent of Shem. So that just means that the Japhethites are living where Shem is supposed to be living. The pale ones are living where the Moors are supposed to be living. The modern Europeans, right? Living where we're supposed to be living. That's what the prophecy says. So yeah, eventually you all come back together one day in a breakfast fight. Nobody really says. We won't even, it happens so fast. It's cause a breakfast fight in a conflict that can't be told in words. You know how it goes. So yeah. Great Seal. Oh, wrong verse. Yeah, all good. Anything else that you see?
Yeah, it looks once again looks like everybody's clear.
Mm-hmm.
They've been.
Oh, look at this one. Ambrosia was it a species of mushrooms? So ambrosia is typically defined in literature. We'll get into that in the next cycle. Ambrosia is typically defined as being either specifically Amanita muscaria, psilocybin cubensis, or some form of brew of its constituents. So urine, because when you ingest the mushroom, the constituents pass through the urine, and the next person can drink it, and they get high. And then you can pee, and the next person, I know that's drinking urine sounds gross, but when mushrooms were scarce, this is what they did, right? Because one person eats the mushrooms, no problem. I can't eat the mushroom, but if I just drink the urine, I get the same effect. So ambrosia was any sort of constituent or compound that was identified as the food of the gods, which was the foods that the gods ate. Because of course, when you ate the foods, that's who you saw. So in the literature, in the scientific literature, ambrosia is defined as either the brews, which contain the entheogens, or specifically Amanita muscaria and psilocybin cubensis. So yes, brews were mushroom. Ambrosia was usually a mushroom. Yeah.
Islam.
Yeah.
Oh, someone just what is the best way to take mystic mushrooms? Smoke or chew?
Honestly, the answer is chewing. I'll tell you why. Because if you smoke it, it'll hit you. It'll hit you the same way, but it won't be as long. You know, because once you're not you smoked it, so then you passed out. Well, you're not smoking anymore unless you're in a tabernacle, right? But the mushroom, you eat a whole bunch. Let's say you eat 30 grams. It doesn't hit you right away, so you can keep eating them. And once it hits you, then you begin to digest them, and it takes a long time, right? So that's why with mushrooms, as you eat them, you're one place, then you're another place, because you eat them, and the first bit hits you, but then the rest just kind of hits you in waves. It's like, you just get deeper and deeper and deeper because you're lying down, you're unconscious, or you're not moving, but you're still digesting. So the experience goes on, goes on, goes on, goes on. So it is a much more thorough experience, which is why that was the preferred way. But of course, after a while, we couldn't eat them all the time. So we had to find, because they just weren't available. So we had to find other ways. And one of the ways was smoking or creating an ointment, or toad venom, for example, right? That's the science of the toads. You guys have watched Naruto, Mount Miyaboku, and the toad sages. They go to the Mount Miyaboku to train under the toad sages, right? Because the toads, they have an oil. They produce an oil. You know, the oil in Mount Miyaboku is very special. In Mount Miyaboku, you would anoint yourself with oil to receive the nature energy, the information from the earth, because that's what it was. The frogs secrete oil from the glands, and you can dry it and smoke it, and you get the same thing, the DMT experience, right? That's the mythology behind frogs. So the frog, right? The frog kissed the princess, and he becomes a prince. The whole toad mythology is about the DMT experience, because this toad produces DMT. This toad, right? So you want to chew them if you can. They're horrible. God damn it, they're horrible. But you can smoke it. But the mushrooms is the original way for a reason, right? Yeah. Is Jesus Christ Yahshua? Jesus Christ an allegory for yourself and finding in yourself? So when we talk about Christianity, we will talk about Cujo first. I think Cujo. I don't know if it was Cujo who first told me about it, but it was someone who I met either through Aquafest, someone who was into the Moorish sciences. Which first, I was a Christian. I grew up a Christian. You know, when I first heard that Jesus was a mushroom, I was like, "What? That made no sense." It makes sense now, and we're gonna get into that esoteric Gnostic Christian stuff in our next cycle. It's very, very important in terms of why Christianity has such a powerful influence on our people, right? On NBCs, right? We'll get into that, but it's basically everything you just said. It's all that and more. Yahshua is. The prophet knew it. That's why he dealt with that. Yeah.
Islam. Give thanks, brother Heru. Great episode as usual.
Yeah.
Honors to all the Moors in the chat. Oh yeah, just put the I didn't put the email in the chat. Just put the email out again.
Yeah, man, put it out. Anybody got questions about any of this stuff? I got lots. Yeah, whatever you want to ask about the session we didn't get through today, just hit me up. And I'm happy to forward whatever information that I can as regards to this stuff. Or just, there's tons of it. And if you guys encounter stuff now that you're looking for it, please, learning something different every time. So it's long.
And also remember that all these are a series of lessons, and it's on the playlist under Moorish Rooms. So if you go to the Canaanland Moorish playlist, you can, if you haven't seen the previous lessons, you can go there and get caught up.
Because we did a lot of Christian stuff. They cool about our first ones, eh? Remember?
Those ones are great.
A lot of, if you want to know about the Jesus stuff, go back and look at lecture number 2, I think, 1 and 2, the end of 1 and 2, because it's all up in there. There's lots of it, and we're gonna go through even more of it later.
Lots.
Yeah.
But give thanks again, more.
No doubt.
Peace and love to all the Moors.
Peace to all the Muslims.
Keep studying.
Stay active.
Stay active.
Stay active, man.
Islam, Moors.
Islam.
Sounds like it's having a hallucinogenic effect. Not like a drug, which is harmful and wrong, and just say no, kids. But bassy nonetheless.
Have you ever heard a thought that you saw? Or felt the pain from third eye to your jaw? Felt schizo, brain circuit strip so. Got me seeing strobe lights like a disco. Under skin crawls, seeing one steak shapes out of the norm. Demonic forms takes. Forces external, stress is extreme. Eyes wide open, though it's a dream. It seems sort of like alienation. Surrounded by aliens at a PlayStation. Nerd impulses, feeling pulses or noses. Suffering from tripped out psychosis. Doses, seeing clouds drip like E.T. Sun rays touch fingertips. Reflect kiss off your cheek like lips, repeating like skips. Peeling the air in strips, pattern swirl. Walls seem to breathe, mixed up senses that I can't perceive. All I see is sounds, I'm hearing what smells. I'm craving the hallucinations like hell. Enter the realm where there's talking gazelles. Speaking metaphysic, I'm feeling depressed. Fez wearing horn, puts his hand on my chest and says, breathe in, breathe out. Breathe out, breathe in, the trip of the tree. In, breathe out, breathe out, breathe in, the trip of the tree. In, breathe out, breathe out, breathe in, the trip of the tree. In, breathe out, breathe out. All I did was have a piece of a shroom. My mind going zoom as I spin with this room. Forks run with spoons, knives guilty for murders they committed. Should I be committed to a mental ward? Straight jacket fitted. Frog walks out the wall talking ribbit. I'm overstanding every word said in my head. Then here comes death, smelling like dead. Telling me to follow him flying on fog. On his death log he checks off guard. Looking into his hood, darkness all I see. And darkness is all around me. Light asks me to take a west sound beat. Then introduced me to speed of thought. And she told me by being told man knows not. Carrying on, swinging like Barry Bonds. The flower bouquet from whence he married yawns. Rapper's frost was a corpse. Power and force, divorced of course. Power is an illusion, took the bigger loss. My last 4 blinks felt like ice rinks. Came to my senses looking down sinks. After that I didn't know what to think, so I just put the rest of shrooms into my drink. Breathe in, the trip of the tree. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe out. Breathe in, the trip of the tree. Breathe out. Breathe out. Breathe in, the trip of the tree. Breathe out. Breathe out. Breathe in, the trip of the tree. Breathe out. Breathe out. The trip is a trip.